Nice. Okay. Sweet. There you go. Wait. Everybody gets a clap. Clap on.
Oh, no, you said more spice to line up.
Yeah, perfect.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Reboot Something podcast. My name's Chad Jeffries, and with us today we have Matt Lake, one of our own DevOps engineers, and we have Scott Dix here, who is one of our solutions architects slash, wait, what do you do?
A little bit of everything, but business development is the name of the game, folks.
Yes. So, but we're excited to have you guys joining us today. And Matt's actually joining us from Atlanta, Georgia. So he supports us remotely, but it was a pleasure to have you in today.
Yeah,
so,
great to be here. I'm excited.
Awesome.
Talk about some cloud and some computer stuff. It's awesome.
Yeah. Exactly.
We love computer stuff.
Trying to take my thunder. No, but as Matt said, we're going to be talking about the cloud. We're going to talk about AWS, DevSecOps, and all the things in between. So we're excited to get into the conversation here. But so Matt, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself? That way, I don't have to make up anything.
Yeah, sure. So I've had a long career in IT, fixing things that are broke. Usually because I broke them. That's how you get started into that stuff. But I'm from West Virginia originally. I grew up in Fairmont, and so I'm a native here. Went to WVU 2-3 times, so I've got a large background in a bunch of different IT topics, from MIS, data science, and software engineering. And then a couple years ago, I had some life circumstances, moved to Atlanta, and now I've had the opportunity to come back and work for Trilogy.
Yeah.
So when I was in West Virginia, I worked as a public sector employee for one of our now customers, I guess, and helped them transition to the cloud. So that's kind of where I got my start. And this was in 2016. They were looking to transition to AWS and Azure, and it ultimately ended up going with AWS. And I've also had some experience in Azure. So after moving away, worked in the private sector for Honeywell, and then another aerospace startup. And I worked in both AWS and Azure for both of those. Mm-hmm. So government, private, all over the place. Yep. Cloud, I love it. It is the way.
Yep.
DevOps is the way. So we were joking a little bit ago. I am my official title is Senior DevOps Engineer, but DevOps is a philosophy, not a job title. So I'm a senior philosopher.
You should put that on your LinkedIn.
Yeah, totally. That's right. When you got cloud evangelists and all those kind of folks. So.
Gurus.
Yeah, and cloud guru.
That's right.
That's right. Yeah,
well, so the waters are going to get deep here on this podcast is what we're saying. We're going to wax deeply about the cloud. So it's going to be wonderful. Yep.
Indeed. Well, let's actually first talk about some of the things that you do for our clients here now. So gave us some of your background, but talk to us kind of about what you do, I guess, in a roundabout way.
Yeah. So I am, as a Trilogy employee, supporting one of our partners, Red Hat. Got my
sure.
So I came straight from here.
Right.
So Red Hat is working with the same customer that was mentioned before, as supporting their Red Hat products. But a lot of that is helping them also transition to the cloud. So adopting some of those cloud technologies, and specifically Red Hat developed cloud offerings that are now out there. Mm-hmm. So I worked mostly supporting a Red Hat contract, and then a lot of internal IT operations for Trilogy itself, making sure that we as a company are secure, that we are doing things, eating your own dog food. Mm-hmm. MFA is a very hot topic right now in the public sector, especially with the executive order that's been published a year or two ago now.
Yeah, it's a hot topic now, but it should have been a hot topic about 7 years ago. But sure.
We're getting there, and I would say that we're paving the way, helping folks implement that stuff. So
yeah. Absolutely. Awesome. I think this is kind of a good segue as talking about Red Hat and cloud technologies, and with the recent ROSA, FedRAMP approved. So now that's, kind of getting into the weeds of that. And the other day we actually had Red Hat in for training from Justin Bowman too. That went pretty well, I would assume.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was super cool. We had one of our Red Hat engineers, Justin Bowman. He provided a kind of how-to. So everybody out there that is not aware with what ROSA is, that is Red Hat OpenShift on service on Amazon Web Services. Big mouthful. So
That's
ROSA, that's what's on the side of the bottle. It is standing up an OpenShift cluster on demand, basically push button. I mean, we've playing around today. We were kind of ingesting what Justin had taught us day before yesterday, and going through the labs and standing these clusters up. We stood up 2 or 3 clusters today. And normally this is an endeavor, standing up an OpenShift cluster. One of my former private sector employers, they had gone through 2 iterations over a period of 2 years and had not successfully set up the cluster and could not get anybody to migrate onto this platform.
Was that on-prem?
It was in the cloud too.
Cloud. Okay.
Yeah. So
great.
like it's a notoriously difficult just thing to do because it's so complex. But Amazon and Red Hat partnering together to develop this product, ROSA, has been phenomenal. And like today we stood up an OpenShift cluster in 20 minutes, which is incredible. Like, I mean, the cloud itself already accelerates your ability to do the thing quickly. And now you're able to deploy extremely complex workloads simply. I mean, with added features for security and certificates management, and all leveraging back-end AWS services. So you get redundant storage and persistent storage with like S3 and EBS volumes. You've are living in multiple availability zones. You've got things deployed behind elastic load balancers. So like if a service goes out, his buddy gets another compute node gets spun up behind it, right? And you don't have any deprecation of service because it is you as a consumer or somebody who's using this service just sees that endpoint, right? So what's behind it? Like you don't care.
That's an interesting question or thought, if we're going to get philosophical for a second, but it seems like, when the cloud came along, it was an abstraction layer, right? On top of, we don't have to deal with hardware anymore, right? This is we just deal with the services sort of at a philosophical level, if you will. We don't have to babysit the hardware. And it feels like it just keeps layering on top of things. Do you feel like as we continue to do this, right? I mean, as someone who has lived OpenShift, lived that life and felt all of the goodness and the not so goodness that comes with it, adding this next layer of ROSA in between, like another abstraction layer on top of that, do you feel like it's important that you still understand what's going on behind the scenes, or is it less important? Does it really just work these days?
That's a hard question for me to answer.
And I ask that about people who are looking to come into the industry, knowing how tough things used to be across all fronts. I mean, it didn't matter what it was, but now it's getting to the point where, like you said, you can spin up an OpenShift cluster in 20 minutes. Yeah. What does that mean for folks that have 20 years of experience coming up through?
Yeah. So I think, so somebody who's coming up through, if you're afraid that this is like going to take your job, that's ridiculous. There's plenty of work out there to be had. We're hiring, so please call me.
Check the website.
DM me on LinkedIn. So shameless plug.
Have to.
I don't think that. So it's double-sided, right? It's extremely easy. I also think you need to have a level of respect for it and understand conceptually what the components are underneath of it. But where the ease comes in is it's no longer having to actually care and feed and manage and curate all these components underneath of it, right? You don't have to you're not doing yum updates on servers so that they get the proper patching level. That's kind of all that's handled. That's not what you need to be worrying about because as a business who wants to use this service, as wanting to accelerate themselves, you need to care about what it is you have in front of your customers, not patching servers and have all these security compliance things. Like that's not what you care about. Like that runs your business, right? You should at a business like fundamental level care about those things. But as far as what you're delivering to a customer, you need to be you can deliver the best product possible as fast as possible because somebody else is out there doing that also, and you need to be ahead of them.
Right. And automation throughout any industry really has freed up the capacity for more work and innovative spaces. So,
Right. And to go back into that, the philosophy angle of things, as we free up, Trilogy time, for example, or as our customers free up time all the way around, we get to take the part of us that's uniquely human, right? The creativity, the ability to sort of make this thing do what it's supposed to do it faster, do it better, do it more efficiently, to update workflows, which really that can't be automated yet. We're at a point where that human creativity, that is the premium. That's the special thing. And quite honestly, when we talk about, Trilogy, one of the things that impressed me most as I came on board a year and a half ago is how innovative many of our thinkers are outside of it. We're talking about designing systems. Again, these aren't necessarily the guys that are doing the updates on systems. They're thinking big about how this happens. Yeah. And so would you say that, Rosa, for example, frees up some of that gray matter?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Because you're no longer having to architect a lot of these like micro components, work together to make this thing work. Mm-hmm. You can see, how you can help build that application better, develop automation, in other parts of the business that helps processes improve. So absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
I get that. It was funny. We were at an event last week with Health and Human Services, and almost without exception, every single CXO, whatever title they had, really spoke about people and culture. The tech itself used to be the focus because it was challenging. It was hard. Getting these things stood up took years sometimes to work all these things out and get things working smoothly. Well, now that things can be adopted quickly, it's a very different game, and it's really one of getting people to come along. And do you find that sometimes in your job that you have to help people see, like, because we're adopting things, kind of get them bought in on things, or is that not such a tough thing with some of the customers you're working with?
It can be scary. This is not your mom and dad's data center anymore.
Yeah.
It's a paradigm shift in how you need to think about what it is you're working on. I was raised in an environment where you've got servers, they're physical servers. I could walk downstairs and touch them. This cannot die, because if it dies, someone could get hurt. And that's bad. Right. But the servers that I build right now, I don't care if they die, because it takes 2 seconds to spin up another one. It's too easy to get another one. Right. So, and that adds an additional level of like comfort to me, because if it fails, like, I know that the service is still going to be up because there's another one coming right behind it.
Right.
So it is. So yes, I mean, it is it's a different mindset. So transitioning to the cloud is a hard problem and especially for organizations that have been building their companies over years and years and years and years. But I will say that it is possible. You need to just be open to it. That's why we're here. That's what I'm here to help you with, is to provide the fastest, the cheapest thing that can stand up and make your business grow. I mean, in business, whether it be public sector or private sector, whatever it is, you have a thing you need to do and you have to put it somewhere. And I mean, I think the cloud is where you can do that.
Well, yeah, simplest. All of that stuff happens simply. It can happen quickly, even though it is a paradigm shift for people that are working on-prem. And the resiliency, the failover, the disaster recovery, all is just an added benefit because it's much easier to achieve in the cloud, at least from my perspective. I should probably give some creds. I am a solutions architect as well.
I was going to say.
But so I can speak the language a little bit, but there are levels to this game for sure. And, even having stepped out for just even a couple of years at this point, I watch things just skyrocketing. I mean, it's going so fast that it's almost intimidating to want to even dip a toe back in because how quickly it goes.
You don't go fast, and
I do want to go fast, which is why I'm so appreciative of our Trilogy team because man, it's like everything. It's greased rails everywhere that we go, and it just feels so good to be a part of it. A machine that runs so smoothly. That's nice.
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of, like you said earlier, a bunch of smart guys, and gals that are out here doing great work, and all just like really happy to get along and work together. And that's really, you'd mentioned culture. That is a big part of it, because I've worked in places where it's almost cutthroat and I don't get it. Why is that?
Yeah.
What is, we're all doing the same thing. So if I mess up, I want you to tell me. And if you mess up, like, it should be open enough to be like, oh yeah, okay, shoot, I should fix this, or, oh, I could do this better, because that's what it's all about. Like,
and
just learning and growing and getting better.
And that culture expands internally too. It's one of those things where we want to partner with, our partners. We don't necessarily see them as competitors. It's like, I think Scott claimed the term competimates.
Well, I heard it I borrowed it from someone else.
You borrowed it from someone else.
Somebody said frenemies, and I heard competimates. I'm like, I like that better.
Yeah, competimates. But it's kind of the same philosophy where it's, it's not just the internal culture that we speak. It's like, how do we, exemplify that in partnering with great companies, third-party service integrators, for example, and other companies that are like Trilogy in a way, and combining that manpower and that expertise, and really
Captain Planet with our powers combined.
Well, it's funny you say that since we have absolute permission to go philosophical here, and I'm just going to keep going back.
You took it there, Matt.
For any of us that have worked at any level of any organization, I don't care what kind of business you're in, one of the most gratifying things that I think a human being can experience is accomplishing something that's really challenging, that is not easy, whether that's on your own. And I would argue that doing something as part of a team where you're all lifting something that you could not do by yourself and achieving that. And I'll just use, for example, one of our customers is FBI CGIS. We can at least say that. Yeah. And we support their NCIC program, big program. It takes a lot of lifting. I mean, there are tons of people, not just Trilogy. It's a lot of people making these systems work and making these systems go. But watching the transformation over the past few years to go mainframe to cloud.
It's crazy how much they've advanced into the cloud out of being a mainframe shop for so long. Like it literally blows my mind every time I walk in there and talking to folks. I'm like, wow, you're doing the thing. This is crazy.
Yeah.
Like, you're good. This is great. And that's how we make that system.
And I'm talking. I was listening to Miles Kelsey is our CIO here at Trilogy. He was plays an instrumental role alongside multiple other Trilogyers. Is that the word?
Yeah,
I think it is. Trilogists. That's great. Sounds very good. But he was talking about how close, and when we say close, it could be years to unplugging that last machine. Inside the walls. And I just can't even quite wrap my head around it. This is a legacy system that's been around since when? 60s, 70s?
I mean, you say a couple years being close, like this is a thing that's been plugged in and running since the 60s. That's what?
Right.
Wow, what? 60 years ago, 70 years ago?
Yeah.
It's been cranking.
That's a while.
Yeah, it's a minute. That's a hot minute. Predates me by quite a bit. And to think about pulling that plug and having this thing running fully in the cloud is just absolutely blows my mind. And the fact that we're doing it at multiple places.
Right.
We literally just encountered this at another event where we talked to somebody and said, oh, we just tried that and we failed. And we're like, man, that's amazing that our scrappy little company is playing an instrumental role in that. And so we were asked to provide our white paper. In fact, our CTO, Craig Molina, brilliant guy as well, is basically, his whole job is to say, hey, this is what we did. This is how we did it. And, we're going to share that. We're going to share that with someone who's not our customer because we want to see them succeed. We want to, of course, anybody in the public sector, we just want to see them succeed. But it's wild that we get to help tell that story and that we're still moving so many systems across the Fed space from mainframe COBOL to cloud native, fully cloud native.
Yeah.
It's wild.
And it's crazy to think about all the newer contracts that we've had and just seeing how far behind they are in comparison to, an FDIC, just for example. So, it kind of it speaks a lot, I think, to just the amount of talent that's in this area. Oh, yeah. And it's great to see.
West Virginians get it done.
West Virginians getting it done for sure. So
it's and it speaks to the agency as well. It's the culture of the agency. They made the choice to move. They asked for people to do it, and we stepped up alongside many of our competimates out there in the space. It's not just Trilogy making it happen.
Yep. So in terms of cloud providers, we obviously have multiple. It seems like AWS is the 800-pound gorilla in the room. But I guess from your all's experience, is there one that's maybe more preferable or I guess tasteful for the government? And what's your experience been with cloud providers?
I'm curious.
Well, here's the thing. I'm a slippery fish, so I'm going to be that way. But to be blunt, I mean, I can joke about it all I want, but there are places in each of the providers that offer incredible value. Some of it depends on the choices that an organization has made. If you've gone in as a Microsoft shop, the integrations that are already built into the Azure platform, which is a solid platform. I've had limited experience, wrote some Terraform in Azure and then supported it at a previous posting that I was in as well. They've got a good product. Google is interesting. They have come third and they have learned from a lot of the challenges that I won't necessarily say mistakes. I mean, everybody was doing the best they could. right? You're figuring this stuff out and it's never been done before.
Yeah.
And so Google has kind of watched it and said, well, we see how this is going, but we're going to try a slightly different way. So they've got a novel way of handling things. They had a narrower, at least out front, a much narrower scope of offerings that they had. They didn't have a ton of things, that what they did, each one did it really well. And so that was a unique offering. Azure, I think, was expansive. They came out and they really offered a ton of things, did the best they could with that to sort of match AWS. And of course, AWS, man, they just, wow, they were the first one. S3 was the first public service, I believe, that they offered. Yep. And I remember hearing about it. I'm like, what's that? That sounds that's storage. Not a big deal. What was that? It wasn't like a mega storage, or I can't remember what it was back in the day. It was one of those free file share services. I'm like, why do we need this? We got Dropbox. We got these, whatever. Yeah. And but S3, well, Dropbox runs on S3. But the thing about Amazon is the incredible flexibility. It is Linux based for any shop that leans that way, which is really every shop I've ever been a part of. It just seems like, if you speak that language, AWS maybe comes a little easier, and then Google too. But honestly, they all have a place. But I have a thought about multi-cloud later. But I'll turn that one over to you.
Okay,
do you have a preference?
I am interested to hear your opinion on that. As far as I'm concerned, they're all about the same. But you hit a lot of points that I was going to make. So AWS is a lot of Linux, but everybody's Linux, right? So even Microsoft,
absolutely,
they've made a massive improvements in the last number of years over open source contributions, and like they have GitLab now. Like, it's phenomenal. So I use Windows 11 at home. I'd never done that. I'd spent decades like basically denouncing Windows for development stuff. And now I use Windows 11 at the house. And
I'm
Windows
on Mac OS, but I develop in Visual Studio Code.
Exactly. I use VS Code for everything now. It's fantastic. Amazing. All I do is get push, get pull. I've got all my extensions. It's beautiful. Yep. It's too easy. It's
they gave that to us.
Yeah, it's open source. You can you can go add things to it if you want to. Contribute. Mm-hmm. I squirreled a little bit there. Sorry.
So which one is the best one?
So they're all about the same, I think. You're right. Google is a little, I wouldn't say behind, but they do have a much narrower scope of offerings, and what they do have is very, very good. Mm-hmm. So like their Kubernetes integration is excellent. Like, they invented the thing, so I would expect that from them. But my personal opinion is I lean more towards AWS, because it does have such an extensive list of offering, and they all work together really, really, really well. In some of the more complex things, even like SageMaker and like all the artificial intelligence stuff, like they've got big space in that. Like, you can use the tools that are in the house with Alexa, right? You can build your own application that leverages the technology that Alexa is built with.
Right.
I'm glad that we didn't hear.
We don't have one of those right now.
Hey, Google. Okay, Alexa.
Everybody be quiet.
Everybody hide your microphones.
But the Microsoft space too, they have really good integration with the Office suite, with Active Directory, which is absolutely 110% dominant in any industry.
And will continue to be.
And it will continue to be. I mean, it's a fantastic product, especially since they've gone to Azure AD. I love it. I can't sing praises about it more. Because I did not enjoy managing Active Directory directly. So Thank you for this SaaS offering. So, but even at that level, these each of these cloud service providers work well together. So you could have distributed workloads in all the clouds. Mm-hmm. If DynamoDB is better for you, and you like the way that virtual machines are spun up in Azure, so you can use an AWS DynamoDB and run your workload or your VM workload in Azure. Excuse me. Mm-hmm. That's okay, and they'll give you directions on how to do that.
Right.
They just want you to do the best thing that's good for you.
That's right.
That's how I feel too, and I think that's why I've ended up here.
Yeah.
So I think they're all about the same, but I do prefer AWS. Depending on what it is, they can be a little bit cheaper, just like minute to minute EC2 and sort of virtual machine costs and stuff, little things like that. But I think Google was actually probably the cheapest of them. And when I say cheapest, it's not like you're saving a bunch of money. It's like they're all right there.
Right. In the federal space, they have an interesting thing. This is more on the business side. And I'll be curious to see how all of this plays out. You know, Google, because they are coming up and they're coming up fast and coming up hot, they've offered a slightly different pricing model only because, or a slightly different way to pay because of the way that the federal government buys services. And so the fact that they're willing to come in and say, I don't know, I'm just gonna make up numbers. You know, how much cloud do you think you're gonna use this year? And you say, well, I think we're going to use about this much. And they say, great. And maybe that's $1 million worth of cloud for a government agency. And then you get to the end of that year and that's what you paid. And if you go over, you don't have to settle up. You just go into the next year and you expand the next year. And that's not a bad model. And I say that that's kind of unique because I know that traditionally, it's not a knock against AWS or Microsoft. It's just really hard for the government to buy cloud services because the government prepays for stuff and they don't really do a utility model on those things.
And that was kind of the hang up too, originally when we started migrating stuff to AWS, is that they weren't comfortable with this. Like, what do you mean you pay as you go? Like, no, you only buy like what you need.
Right.
Like, that's it. Like, you want to spend 10 minutes on a VM, like you pay for 10 minutes.
That's it.
But and they're used to having these like year-long contracts, right? With millions of dollars. And you may still end up spending that, but it was difficult for them to understand or like kind of initially wrap their minds around allocating the funds to be able to do that. So there was a lot of like internal, like really interesting internal business development within the government at the time to like figure out how to pay for these things, you know, because they'd never done it before.
And honestly, I love the pay-as-you-go model. It's phenomenal. Works. And in the private sector, no brainer. You know, it's literally legislation. It's just how the government has to pay bills. But they you know, there are ways around that, working through resellers and things like that make that path like butter, right? And they get better negotiated prices. There's all kinds of good things there. But it is just interesting to watch how this all plays out in the federal space as it unfolds. But you know, one of the trends that we saw, if we're going to talk about cloud here a little bit in a different way, was, you know, a few years ago, the word multi-cloud became a buzzword. And I'd be really curious to hear what your thoughts on multi-cloud.
So define multi-cloud for me.
So a lot of folks were saying that the idea behind multi-cloud was, or is, if you're still kind of playing that game, that you need to diversify across multiple clouds, and that you need to, I'm not sure why you need to diversify across multiple clouds, but that you should be leveraging Azure. Maybe it's cost efficiency on a singular product, but kind of not putting all of your eggs in one basket.
Yeah. So, and that's the thing I think that they want to, my personal opinion is you're holding yourself back by doing that, because you can't leverage some of the awesome services that are out there in any of the cloud providers, because you're limited to an EC2 instance or a VM, right? So in a past life, we actually had an entire service built that was using only cloud services. So Azure Functions and Cosmos DB. We had a customer that was in a disconnected environment, and they were a very large customer, and they kind of operated the mindset from the 80s. So they wanted us to re-engineer this whole thing and basically build Azure services on Azure, but without Azure services. So we were taking, taking like Cosmos DB and turning it into MongoDB. So we'd spin up VMs and we'd install Mongo. We would take VMs and install Kafka instead of Azure Functions. So that was extremely hard. So hard. Like it was stupid hard, because like this is already solved and that we're already inventing the wheel.
Was the idea that just in case you needed to move it?
Yeah. Well, and they wanted the ability to move to another cloud or to on-prem, right? So we thought, we're going to be smart. We're going to deploy this in Kubernetes. So we'd spin up a Kubernetes cluster, which actually helped a lot, right? Because the actual deployment of the applications and such, all the applications were already containerized. So that helped significantly. But these platform deployments needed to be containerized. Yeah. And there's plenty of projects out there, and there's plenty of like documentation on how to do these. So like we got that. But then moving away from operating in a cloud environment into a VM, or running in a VMware environment, or on Daisy's computer under her desk in the middle of nowhere. that became
Don't unplug
hard.
that system. It's the key to everything.
Yeah, the internet's out there running on somebody's server on our desk from 1995. It's not been unplugged. That battery backup's going to fail one day. But the little things like where do we get certificates from? Where do we get DNS from? The load balancer, like in AWS, if I stand up a load balancer, it's click, 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 or a Terraform, like stand up load balancer. That's not so easy on Daisy's computer under her desk because there's a lot of other things that go into that, right? Like you need actual appliances sometimes to do that. And then that gets expensive. And then when at that time of the customer, they were trying to also save cost. So it's kind of just all over the place. Ended up moving on to something else, but yeah, I think they eventually ended up abandoning that project because the customer realized like, well, maybe we should just kind of like stick with what we had, and modernize their business process a little bit.
I know from my perspective, at first I kind of was like, okay, people are going multi-cloud. They want to have a presence here, here, and here. And so I guess that's what we're doing. So we've got to be able to support it. We got to be able to think smart about how this is going to happen. But as folks have built in, as the providers have built in tooling, that makes crosstalk easier, makes cross management easier. I mean, in Azure, I believe they have a dashboard now that allows you to manage all three of the major providers.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's phenomenal.
Yeah. And it's really interesting to see the level of documentation coming out of each of them for hooking
supporting
up to
one
each
another.
All the other stuff.
Absolutely.
So,
but the place that always broke down for me was the skills gap, because in terms of it's not that the principles are the same, jumping from, in my experience, an on-prem environment to the cloud was a shift, but wasn't that big of a shift, right? What you had to learn was where to click, what API to talk to, what was the name of the service, what was the price. And it wasn't that hard, it just took time to get there, and also adopting the mentality. And I would argue that replicating or getting people trained up to be able to be efficient in another cloud is a spin up time. It's not that it can't be done. It can absolutely be done. If you know AWS, you can jump to Azure, you can jump to wherever. It's finding things and finding how to talk to them and learning the quirks of these systems. And
there's little things between each of them. Like a virtual machine is basically an EC2 instance, but the networking is not the same, right? So AWS considers you've got multi-regions, and inside of a region is an availability zone. But in Azure, you don't have the concept of an availability zone in the same way that AWS does. So some of the constraints aren't the same because they've just called it different words.
Right.
But it's kind of the same, but it's enough that if you're going to be across all of them, as a business trying to deploy an application across all of them, you're spreading yourself too thin. As far as like being able to deploy and like you said, the skills gap between, you need to be able to manage across all these different things. And understand all those words. And like, I would rather have somebody spun up like really well in one instead of like, I
would argue that it would be like developing an application and saying, look, you guys are going to write in JavaScript and Node. You guys are going to write in Python. You guys are going to do Ruby. Go. And it's like, okay, well, it can be done.
Yeah,
absolutely. Right. It can be done. But sort of unifying on a concept does seem to accelerate. I mean, and keep things moving.
Because then that opens up other opportunities for the business to grow, right? Because now everybody who's writing in Node can share all the Node code, and we're not going to get into a debate about like React versus Angular. That's probably another podcast. But it's
put it on the list.
But just talk about it now. I'll clip it.
But I mean, that is an opportunity for building the internal knowledge base of the system that you're working on, right?
That's right.
So,
and knowledge sharing, inside of it. It's one of the things I love about Trilogy. You hop into a Teams channel and people are, sharing. There's a lot of that going on, and it's nice to be able to cross-pollinate that way. But if we were all working in different systems and be able to say, well, philosophically, this is how it's done, isn't it quite as helpful as like, no, you need to go here and do this and make that happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So in talking about some, our customers, obviously, most of them being, in the federal space, what are some of the big, hangups whenever you're, trying to sell cloud, or maybe, a portion of their service, or maybe a new product, because, AWS is releasing new products all the time. So how do you go about, selling those products, or I guess, maybe a use
It'll
case
be
of
okay.
getting a, what's that?
It'll be okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. We talked about culture shifts earlier, and a lot of that is about creating a sense of psychological safety, right?
Yeah.
That this is going to be okay. And here are the reasons why. Especially in agencies that are already in the cloud, right? You would think that once you're there, continuing to grow would be easier, but it's not necessarily true, because it is project specific, it's department specific. There are a lot of moving parts inside of these things, and change is challenging for all of us. It's not, to some degree or another, change is hard.
Yeah.
And so getting people to feel comfortable with those things is important. I have some other thoughts about that, but I'll let you.
Well,
wax a little bit.
bringing in experts or having your people trained to be experts goes a long way. And trust them. Like, you're investing in your people
Right.
to do the right thing. Trust them. I mean, there are ways. Everyone gets nervous about the security in the cloud, right? Like, oh, it's could touch the internet.
Yep.
That might be okay. Maybe that's okay for your business model. Maybe you've got a public-facing service you need to operate, but there are controls in place that are relatively simple to implement
And rock solid.
Yeah. And you've got not only yourself behind this, right? So a lot of customers have always worried about like DDoS, so distributed denial of service. And that's not really something that I worry about, because I know that if I've got like this one port open and like my service is listening to that, my security group is going to protect everything else. And if something happens, like, or somebody starts spamming like my load balancer, I'm going to get an alert. AWS is going to get an alert, and then they're going to take care of it, right? They're going to go find this guy and take care of business, because they don't want us to look bad. And it's like, oh, well, I don't like the cloud, because that impacts them.
That's right.
So like all these services being
Yay for
robust,
shared responsibility models,
shared
right?
responsibility model.
Yep.
It's fantastic, right? So the higher you go up in that pyramid, the better your services are, because you're putting more responsibility on those folks. So that's why, earlier we're talking about multi-cloud versus single cloud. When I say go into one cloud, that lets you use more robust services like DynamoDB, that you just need to put your data in the thing. Let somebody else manage it being updated and it being performant and stuff like that. There are little knobs you can turn to get some more juice out of the thing, but it's really abstract in such a way that like that's not what you need to care about.
Yeah.
So, it's funny. I bumped into a not a customer, but a federal agency that basically is trying to do, or I will say tried to do, what we have done twice, which is mainframe COBOL to cloud. Yeah. And we heard that they didn't have a good run of it the first time. And we're like, I wonder what happened. And it turns out, and this might not make a lot of sense to some listeners, but they just took all of the code and jammed it through a translator, COBOL one side, Java on the other, and then hoped for it to work. And they were like, we've got 1 million lines of code that I was told. I'm like, okay, that's an irrelevant metric right now. What we need to talk about is the architecture. Yeah. What do the bits and pieces of this code do? Yeah. And can we turn them into little bits and pieces and turn them into things? But there is kind of a lot of it does come down to philosophy, the how. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. The how are we going to do this? There is more than one way to deal with this situation. Absolutely. Our way, the way that Trilogy has done it twice, might not be perfect, but it's proven. Mm-hmm. It has worked, and it's been our SLAs are being met, which are incredibly short. And if we miss them, we're answering to Congress, right? It's no joke on these SLAs. And so, to hear people sort of missing the boat, as you're trying to sell concepts in the cloud, because they're not exploring all of the how and the different ways that can be done, it can be a little bit frustrating sometimes to watch when it's like, we might not have the perfect way, but we got a good way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And like breaking those up into different, like what is the thing doing, right? Mm-hmm. And then breaking that up into smaller things, like jobs that need to be done.
Yeah, killing the monolith.
Those, then it's no longer a monolith. It's not this massive machine that needs to be run. It's a bunch of tiny machines. It's like nanobots versus
going right back to what you talked about, where if one of them starts getting shook up, isn't meeting certain metrics, whatever, it just takes itself offline and is replaced.
Exactly. Like that's the beauty of the container orchestration platform like Kubernetes or OpenShift on AWS.
It's beautiful.
Like it handles those things, but you need to kind of shift how you think about what is this thing doing? Like, what do I need out of it? Because I don't care about the code. Like I don't care about the application. I care about what it can do for me, right? Like I care what job it fulfills at the end of the day, because that is what actually matters. So
yeah. So let's talk about security. I feel like obviously the nature of the data and information that we're dealing with is obviously at risk. So let's talk about DevSecOps and just security in general. So one question I have for you is how does AWS enable? What was that?
I'm gonna get my sparkling water.
Okay. Yes.
Trilogy sparkling water.
We'll make sure to clip that in. So how does AWS enable organizations to implement DevSecOps workflows?
Well, since you can do things so much faster, it allows you to create more automation, and more automation is better, right? Because if it's repeatable, you want to keep doing the same thing over and over again, right? Because then it becomes predictable. So I would say that's one of the big things that AWS lends to security is repeatability and writing infrastructure as code so that it is exactly how I said it was the last time I left it. And if it's not, wax it and put it back the way it was, And there's a lot of even tools built into AWS that will do that for you. So even if something like shifts out of what it's supposed to be for like a minute, it's like, no, it'll put it back the way it was. Yeah. So
what are some of the tools and services that AWS provides for
configuration manager,
development and operations?
Yeah. So configuration manager is kind of a big one. So that's like the thing that you can use to say what your machines are going to look like. Mm-hmm. CloudFormation is another big one. But Terraform is another good tool I like to use. Ansible is another excellent tool for configuration management of like config files and standing up infrastructure, things like that. Mm-hmm. But then code pipelines and testing your code. Test your code. Like there's no reason that you shouldn't be testing your code.
We test that live, right? We test that live?
You want to test everything before it goes anywhere. Yeah. I mean, you hear of these like...
I guess you could do that.
Something like live. So some of these, you hear these sexy stories from the big folks like Facebook or Google deploying thousands and thousands of times a day. And there was a period in time when these folks came into the public sector employees, one that I worked for, and was trying to like sell these concepts like, hey, this is possible. This is how we do it as Facebook or as Apple. And you can too, because you're the government and you should be this way. But it sounds scary to be deploying thousands of times a day to your production environment. But now take a step back. Okay. You want to make as little change as possible, right? Like when you've got this big monolithic system in place. So because change is scary, change is bad, change breaks things. So what happens is we like store up all these changes and we get like this big massive release at the end of the year. And then we push it at the end of the year and oh my gosh, everything blew up and now this is why change is bad. Mm-hmm. No, like do a small one.
Little change, watch it.
At a time.
Little change, watch it.
Yes, exactly. Small incremental improvement. And that also doesn't mean that you're doing it live. You go straight into production. That's not the answer either. But you have being able to spin up environments quickly that are exactly what you would expect in production. Mm-hmm. And, that code is tested.
And why are they exactly the same? Because the environments themselves were coded and deployed in two different places.
Exactly.
So they're mirrors of each other, pixel perfect.
Exactly. Pixel perfect. Yeah. Like I may have been doing this for 35 years, but I am still a human being. I'm going to screw something up. I have screwed up a lot. I'm going to screw up a lot, but the more things that I can put into code and make the same every time, like I know that environment is going to be deployed the same way every single time I press play.
I'm going to say a dirty word. ATO.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of times in government, people are afraid of the ATO. It's actually a great process, right? It forces us to go through a very long list of controls and make sure that all of those boxes are checked. Now, previously, when we were doing this on-prem, we would build this thing out, we would get it ATO'd, and then what? Right? Because there are physical changes to the systems that are being made. Hard drive swapped out, different things are happening all the time. Now that we're in the cloud, once something, to go back to config manager, for example, or some of the AMIs that we may use, the machine images, once these things have been proven and vetted and all the boxes are checked, it is literally etched in stone at that point. And so you are compliant to the ATO, and you're checking all of the boxes. And so while, going through that process can be a challenge, and it's a lot to get done, it's actually a really good process. And the cloud complements the ATO process so beautifully.
Yes. Yeah. Because all that stuff is codified. But that doesn't mean that you don't have a stone today, tomorrow, and the day after, right?
That's
so
right.
that becomes more of like a fluid ATO, because it's changing daily based on the checks and balances that you've got with your code, right? So instead of deploying directly to production, you've got 2 or 3 environments that it's going to before that,
and we're using
in that pipeline.
And we're using tools like Splunk or Inspector, or these kinds of things that are we already have the checks built. Right? We know how to do it. So you just stand these things up and run it again and make sure, hey, are all the boxes checked like we had before?
Exactly. And you know that stuff before it goes live.
That's right.
So it's okay for it to go live every day, but it's probably 2-3 days behind because it's already gone through all those checks and balances before.
I would argue one thing, and this is an important thing. We talk about security in the cloud. It feels so wide open. Like, oh my goodness, it's on a computer in outer space and anybody can get to it, right? But the fact of the matter is at the end of the day, people are always the weakest link.
Yep.
Yeah, always. In the security world, people are always the weakest link. It's not Azure or Google or any cloud
Microsoft is getting rid of passwords, right? Like, this is their whole philosophy, is they don't want to have passwords because people come up with passwords, and that's how these big systems
that's right, they're flawed.
We all follow the same kind of premise. Like, this is my dog's
password,
name,
but now I got to write it down. So now I'm going to pick it up off your Post-it and write it into your computer.
Exactly.
Yeah. If it doesn't end with 1, 2, 3 bang, it's not even a password.
Oh, geez. So how does AWS provide some visibility and control to the security of, the application development lifecycle?
Oh, so like through your code tools, like code pipeline, code build, Inspector, Guard Duty is another service that they offer that like kind of just gives you visibility into things. And when they change, you can configure them to provide notification or to fix it. Like, maybe you don't want to I don't care. I don't want to wake up at 3 a.m. because Bob changed some config file. Change it back.
That's right.
I'm going to talk to Bob tomorrow.
That's right. Or when I get back from vacation, whatever.
Yeah.
It's a very different situation, right? I mean, there were so many, I'm sure you've had many of them too, where you get the call at 7 p.m. And then you're up for so long. You're awake. You're tag team with somebody else. You sleep for a couple hours, and then I'll sleep for a couple hours, and you're just pounding on these problems, right? These on-prem issues with these servers, and that was the biggest thing for the cloud. Once I learned how to automate and sort of codify things in a way that they couldn't be changed, or that they could, but it would roll back if a problem was found. It was a game changer. I haven't had an overnighter that I didn't want to do for quite some time. It was usually they're deadline driven now, which is different.
Yeah,
that's a very different situation rather than something that drives you because something breaks and you've got to show up and be there until it's fixed.
That's not a fire, right? Like,
right.
I don't want to be a firefighter.
No.
I want to be a philosopher.
Well said.
That's great. So does AWS integrate with other like security tools? Like vulnerability scanners, I guess. What is that? SE or SIEM?
Some tooling.
Yeah. So
some tooling. So
do they make it kind of simple?
Yeah. The short answer is yes. Every cloud provider is really just computers, API interfaces, direct interfaces. It's the same as everything. And so, for example, a Splunk shop, that's a third-party tool used for, data collection and logging and things like that. The ability to, for example, if everything's going serverless these days, everything's going containerized. Yeah. Back in the day, it used to be agents that were installed on servers and things, but
sometimes you can do that. Sometimes it just all depends on the
different ways to do it.
Yeah.
But you can take something that is not at all related to AWS and point it at those services and have it watch all the way down the line. And it doesn't matter if it's AWS, any cloud provider is set up to be able to do those kinds of things. If it computes, we can generally integrate external tooling. Would you agree?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, because at the end of the day, like they are all about the same thing. Right? S3 is object store.
Blob.
I mean, it's just just an object storage place. Now where they get nitpicky is like, oh, I'm like sub 10 millisecond, like I'm sub 5 milliseconds. That's fast. Either way, right. But all these tools, They work generally just about anywhere you can plug them into.
Yep.
I would say, because they're all API driven, and that is another really important thing. Is that all these applications, if you built with like RESTful APIs, that you can talk to them and get them integrated with other things. So,
Yep.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. It's a new world, Chad. It's a new world.
It is. And it's always changing.
and we're hiring. We need your help.
Help us embrace the change too.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I think this was a great conversation. Do you guys have?
I had fun.
Yeah.
I'm jazzed. I'm like,
I know.
I'm like,
I feel
can
like
I
we
work with you guys again?
Yeah. So, I mean, do you guys have any final thoughts? Anything maybe you want to speak to customers about? Is there anything in general, maybe for somebody that's trying to break into, cloud technologies? Any recommendations for those folks?
I mentor a few people in cloud, and I watch them come through this. And I will say that the quick short answer is just do it. Right. So many folks are like, well, what should I study? What should I do? What should I do?
Yeah.
And the answer is find the broadest thing that sort of applies. I know in the AWS world, I have a Solutions Architect Associates certification. It's not the easiest certification, but it's not that hard, right? I mean, it's
you got to work for it.
You got to work for it.
You got to know what you're talking about.
A lot of
But at the end
content,
of the day,
and it covers the whole spectrum.
Yeah.
And Microsoft has a version of that. Actually, they've got really great programming and educational tools that'll get you there. Google has really great programs. All the three of them do. They're
I would say
terrific.
they even have like online courses that walk you through, and Red Hat too. They all have free, like available courses you can take online to go through these.
And so I would always argue, and I would love to hear what you think about this as well, to pick that general, like the SAA, right? The Solutions Architect Associate is a very general certification, but it's deep. It's no joke, right? You got to know it. But there's one for every cloud that's out there. And if you have a proclivity or a pull to one, grab it and go. And don't hesitate on that stuff too much or overthink it, because there's always more to learn. If you wanted to get a Solutions Architect Associate, or you wanted to get go the developer track or something like that, it doesn't really matter. They cross over so much. It really just depends on what you're drawn to. But don't overthink it. Dive in. The education is relatively inexpensive. And I'll tell you what, those particular certifications really are of benefit if you're looking to break into the market.
Yeah, because, I mean,
absolutely.
It's not easy. Like, it's possible, but when you come out of that on the other side, you know what you're talking about.
You know it.
Yep.
Because I've got my SAA too, and I studied mine off for it. And
yes,
I mean, and I was good before. Like I'd been doing this for years, and I still had to study, and it was still difficult, but it was worth it because the process of actually studying and doing that stuff teaches you more too, right?
Absolutely.
But yeah, that's what I would say is just I'll throw my 2 cents in. Get out there and do the thing. Find a problem that you want to solve. I don't know. Like, I want to build a website. Like, okay, well, how does that work? Yeah. Google is your best friend. I've forgotten more than I know right now. And I always learn more because I'm like, how do I do this in Google? Like, I will take somebody who is just naturally curious and willing to learn. Those are like those are the 2 most important things to me when I'm hiring somebody, is that you are curious and you're willing to learn. Like, get out there and do the thing. Like, I want to see you jump in the ditch with me and start digging, because we're going to do this together. But like, you really have to want to get there and get dirty to do it.
Yeah. And I remember we were interviewing somebody the other day, and you gave them, just the most basic example of what they could do to apply what we were talking about.
Yeah.
And it may have been Linux. I forget exactly what it was, or it may have been in relations to the cloud, but just taking something relevant in your life, taking that data, and then taking what you learn from these classes and actually applying it for pretty cheap too. So
yeah, I mean, some of them are free. Some of them you can put some money into. I'll plug Cloud Guru, because I think
that's what I did.
Awesome. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Like, and you get like sandboxes to all the clouds and video and self-paced classes. Like, I love Cloud Guru. Used to be
I was really
Linux
hoping somebody was going to slam dunk that.
Cloud Guru. So I did both courses. I did the full Cloud Guru, and then they changed the exam. Then I jumped to Linux Academy, did the whole, I kind of rocketed through that one because it was the same material basically.
Yep.
And then Cloud Guru bought Linux Academy.
So now
they
they're
merged.
the same.
Now they're the same, but both of those were phenomenal. I mean, all told, if you watch every video at 1X and you do every lab, you're in for at least 120 hours of material at least, just to do that kind of stuff. And checking in on your quizzes, making sure that you're up to date and things like that. And I remember I took my test, and I took it in Las Vegas at Amazon reInvent.
Oh, nice.
Which was awesome.
So you got to go to the arcade and stuff?
Oh, it was amazing.
Cool.
Got to go there. And I remember feeling so antsy the whole time, like waiting for my, whatever. But I think as soon as you took it, you knew whether you passed or not.
Didn't know.
I'm not sure.
I had to wait a couple of days. It was so nerve-wracking.
I think you're right, because I took it 3 or 4 years ago, whenever that was, 3 years ago, and maybe I didn't get it. And I was nervous the whole time. I can't remember if I was nervous leading up to it or nervous after. It could have been both. But yeah, I passed it on the first time, but that was because I did the courses twice. I found GitHub is full of good notes.
Oh yeah,
people like take all their notes and store them on GitHub for you to review, and so many helpers out there that are willing to help.
Truly,
that's another thing too. Like, I just finished this podcast. It's a Red Hat podcast called Command Line Heroes, and
that's a great name.
It's awesome. It's so good. I can't sing its praises enough. But it's there's 9 seasons of it, and each season they talk about a different topic. So I think last season was like cybersecurity. The first one was like kind of the history of open source and compute. So you kind of get the OS wars. You get like, where did open source come from? Yeah. One season they talked about the history of programming language. Like, I mean, that sounds super boring. No, it's like Game of Thrones. It's fraught with people like battling each other. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
And like C was written from B by like an intern in like a couple weeks.
Was Lex Friedman was part of that, right? Oh,
it
doesn't matter. Yeah,
but it's
guy's
like,
amazing. Look him up.
And like the C language is in literally everything that we use. Everything we use. Yeah. And he just did it because he needed, combine these 2 languages and make sure that it works together and that we can use it in the future.
PC cake.
Yeah. And he just did it. And like I'm ashamed that I don't remember his name now, but it's like the world is running on this man's work.
You're a cloud philosopher.
Yeah, but it's a great podcast. And just, if you're learning stuff, like just find things to get out there and do. Like, so pick up stuff like that. Like, go check out Command Line Heroes. Break something. Get your grandma's old computer or your old computer and install Linux on it. Try and just poke around and like, how do I change directories? You got to start somewhere. Just get dirty. One
of the things I'll add to that, which I think is a lot of people sometimes overlook when they think about tech people. Right, it's like, oh, he's tech. He's very, what is it, right-brained? I'm not even sure which brain it is.
Mathematical logic.
Right. Yeah. It's actually, I would argue that it's the exact opposite. Technology, whether it's the cloud, and quite honestly, the cloud, when it really kind of came to fruition, was like the most beautiful canvas that I'd ever seen. The possibility, it feels like walking into an office store when you're like, oh my gosh, all the stationery and pens. The cloud was that way for me as well. But I felt that way about my first computer, my Gateway 2000 back in the 90s. It felt like the world of possibility was open. And if you had any of that in there, just find the thing that tickles your fancy the most and go do that. And if you need help, join a forum. And that was hard for me. I was very nervous about interacting with people on the internet. Still kind of am a little cagey. Yeah. But people will help you.
Yeah. And open source is actually a really cool way to get into that. And open source, you may think, oh, I got to be a developer. I need to be a programmer to do this thing. No, not at all. If you just find a project, for example, I like to play Valheim. It's a video game. My brother and friends, we got like a server running at the house that we all connect to. But there's a couple open source projects that we use to actually run that software, and they need documentation, right? Like, so how do I install this on my Synology NAS? Well, there's not directions. I figured it out, so I can write the documentation and become a contributor.
Right.
Like, that is an excellent way to help, because now, since this is open source, someone else can come along and consume that and make it better.
Absolutely. I jumped into I was just checking out a project the other day called AppSmith, a low code open source project.
Tell me about that.
Went in there. It was kind of neat. It was like a little software thing, almost drag and drop with a little bit of JavaScript and SQL. It was kind of neat. And went into their tutorial, and the first thing I saw was a bug, and it just popped right up. It literally reported itself to me through their website. And so the first thing I did was jumped over to their GitHub page and was like, hey guys, jumped in here to do this. And this is contributing to open source, right? Yeah. Here's a screenshot of what I'm seeing. Here was the expected behavior. we're done. And they were like, hey, thanks so much. We'll get that fixed. That is also contributing to open source.
Because now somebody else doesn't have to experience that problem.
It's small.
And like just that incremental change, we're going back to this iterative development thing again.
Yeah.
I mean, that micro change is making the application better. And the stronger you build it over time, it just does nothing but get better, stronger, faster.
Right. And that's Trilogy in a nutshell.
Daft Punk
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's right.
Less trolls, though. Less trolls than the internet.
Way less. Oh,
A
man.
lot of people willing to help, which is great. So, well, gentlemen, it was great to have you guys on, and thank you so much for listening. We're going to have so many more topics to talk about. This was just skimming the surface. So, Matt, next time you're in, we're going to scoop you back and
Absolutely,
dive a little deeper. So,
Too cool.
Awesome.
Thank you.
But thanks for joining us today, and we'll talk to you soon.
Clapper! Guys, that was super fun. Yeah.